Who has seen the wind? Neither I nor you. But when the leaves hang trembling, the wind is passing through. Who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I. But when the trees blow down their heads, the wind is passing by. So I thought I'd start today with a poem about the wind, because that's what we're going to be talking about today, is wind. So we are currently celebrating Pentecost, and the wind has to do with the story of Pentecost as well. And breath or air and wind, this is often used as a way of talking about God's Spirit. And so that has to do with Pentecost, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more too. So, but let's talk a little bit, before I get more into the wind aspect of things, let's talk about a little more about the story of Pentecost, which we're currently celebrating. So, you ever had to wait for something? Not so much fun, is it? And in this story, there are people waiting. So Jesus's friends were waiting. They were praying, and Jesus has promised them that a special gift would come, but they just had to wait for it, sort of like waiting for presents on Christmas morning or before Christmas morning, right? So they waited and they wondered what was coming, and they prayed. Soon it was time for the joyful spring harvest festival. Many people from far away came to Jerusalem to celebrate this. It was a time to say thank you to God for the new wheat that had grown in the fields and all the abundance that had grown. So Jesus' disciples went to celebrate too. They gathered together in a house in Jerusalem, and once they were there, what did they do? They waited, and they sang songs, and they told stories of Jesus, and they prayed. And they waited some more. Suddenly, everyone stopped because they could feel something happening from the tops of their heads to the tips of their toes. It was sort of like the sound of the wind rushing through the room. It was as if the wind was whirling and whistling all around them, and roaring and bellowing between them and among them in the room. And everywhere, everything was touched by this wind. It was all around them. Then it was as if sparkling, dancing flames of fire were dancing around them too. The room was filled with bright, flashing colors. God is with us, they shouted. We can feel God's love. We are not alone. God's Spirit is with us. Everyone became very excited. They rushed into the streets of Jerusalem. Peter began telling people about Jesus, and the people listened. Many, many people wanted to become Jesus' followers that day, and they asked Peter to baptize them. And this is how the Christian church began. So now this is a very special day for us too, as it's the birthday of the Christian church. So that is the story of Pentecost. And the whole wind aspect of it very much resonates for me, because have you ever gone outside just before a thunderstorm? And we don't get many thunderstorms here in MDI, unfortunately, because I love them. But when you feel that approaching stormy weather coming on a summer's evening, you go outside and it's not raining yet, and it's beginning to get dark, and all of a sudden it gets really windy. This actually happened a few days ago when I had been working outside and left my laptop outside open, went inside to get my lunch, and all of a sudden I thought it heard it raining. So I ran out to get my laptop, but it wasn't raining yet. It was just this crazy wind. And then the wind went away and some rain passed through. But I love that moment before a storm where everything starts getting really windy and you can't see the wind, right? You can't see the storm yet. When the storm comes, you see rain in the air, you see the lightning, you can see the storm. But the wind you can't see. But you can see the effect the wind has on everything around it, right? It makes the trees bend over, the leaves shudder, makes your hair blow around if you've got long hair, and it affects everything it touches. So this is why it's to be a symbol for the Spirit of God, because you can't see God's Spirit, right? But you can feel it. You can see the effects it has. It makes the trees grow. So once again, like the wind, you can see on the trees, you can see God's Spirit in the trees as the leaves are just beginning to come out on the trees now. They're small, but they're getting bigger. So I always love that moment before the storm because you can feel the energy in the air. You can feel it. There's the wind itself, but even beyond that wind, you could just it creates this the spirit of God, and you can really feel it at that time. So once there's a story that has really captures that moment before a storm for me. So I'm going to read it to you. I was going to divide it in two because it's a picture book, so it's not really long. But for a picture book, it's a little bit longer. But and I was going to. There's a couple of themes I could touch on in it, but I'm going to read the whole thing because there really wasn't a good stopping spot. So bear with me, but it's a wonderful book, and you have probably have heard it before. I'm assuming you've heard it before, and if you haven't heard it before, well then that's totally wrong. So the story is um, Time of Wonder by Robert McCloskey. And if you've never heard Robert McCloskey, will tell your parents to get you some more Robert McCloskey books because he was a great writer from Maine, from around where we live, just a little bit west of where we are in Mount Desert Island, actually near where my folks are in Deer Isle, and wrote some wonderful books of Make Way for Duckling, One Morning in Maine, Blueberries for Sal, and Time of Wonder. And there's wonderful illustrations in it too. So I probably won't include all the illustrations because once again, there's a lot of them, but um, so I will read it to you, and it just really captures that moment before storm and the energy and the spirit that is in the air affecting everyone that it touches. Out on the islands that poke their rocky shores above the waters of Penobscot Bay, you can watch the time of the world go by, from minute to minute, hour to hour, from day to day, season to season. You can watch a cloud peep over the Camden Hills, 30 miles away across the bay. See it slowly grow and grow as it comes nearer and nearer. See it darken the hills with its shadow. And then see it darken, one after the other, Islesboro, Western Island, Pond Island, Hog Island, Spectacle Island, Two Bush Island. It darkens all the islands in between. Until you, on your island, are standing in the shadow, watching the rain begin to spill down, way across the bay. The rain comes closer and closer. Now you hear a million splashes. Now you even see the drops on the water, on the age-old rocky point, on the bayberry, on the grass. Now take a breath. It's raining on you. At the water's edge on a foggy morning in the early spring, you feel as though you were standing alone on the edge of nowhere. You hear a snorting sound from out of nowhere, and you know that no, you are not alone. A family of porpoises is nearby, rolling over and over, having an acrobatic breakfast of herring under the bay. Then through the fog, you hear Harry Smith over at Blasto's Cove start the engine of his lobster boat and go out to pull his traps. Suddenly, there is a ripple and a splash along the shore that makes you jump. It is the wake from Harry Smith's lobster boat, and you smile because your feet almost got wet that time. The ripple disappears into the fog, and though you cannot see it, you know that it is silently gliding, gliding on its way. Then another distant, unseen splash, and the gulls and cormorants on Two Bush Ledge, with their seabird sense of humor, start giggling and laughing because they too were suddenly surprised by the wake. Back from the shore, the trees look like ghosts in the fog. The forest is so quiet that you can hear an insect boring a tunnel deep inside a log. And that other sound, not the beating of your heart, but the one like half a whisper, the sound of growing ferns, pushing aside dead leaves, unrolling their fiddleheads, slowly unfurling, slowly stretching. Now the fog turns yellow. The bees begin to buzz, and a hummingbird hums by. Then all the birds begin to sing, and suddenly the fog has lifted. And suddenly that you find you are singing too, with the blue water sparkling all around, with the blue water sparkling all around. At the height of the summer season, the bay is spotted with boats, with racing sailboats, with cruising schooners, with busy fishing boats, and with buzzing outboards. In the afternoon, you sail among the islands, pushed by gentle breezes. You sail close by Swain's Cove ledges, where a mother seal nurses her baby. And then at sunset, with porpoises puffing and playing around your boat, you come about and set a course for the island that is home. The rock on the point of the island is very old. It was fiery hot when the world was new. It was icy cold when the glacier covered it with grinding weight. This morning, the rock is warm in the sun and loud with happy noise of children who have come to spend the day. They dive off the rock and swim, then stretch out, dripping in the sun, making salty young silhouettes on the old scars made by the glacier. In the afternoon, when the tide is out, they build the castle out of rocks and driftwood below the spot where they had belly whopped and dog paddled during the morning. In the evening, when the tide is high again and all your guests have gone, you row around to the point, feeling lonely until an owl asks a question. A heron croaks an answer. A seal sniffs softly as he recognizes you, and eider ducks and fish hawks are all listening. All are watching as you row. By the rock, you shine a light down into the water. There is a crab on the bottom, just where you are playing this afternoon. He tiptoes sideways through the castle gate and disappears into its watery keep. You snap off the light and row toward the dock as the stars are gazing down, the reflections gazing up. In the quiet of the night, 100 pairs of eyes are watching you, while one pair of eyes is watching over all. As the days grow shorter and shorter, there are fewer and fewer boats on the bay, until at last only the fishing boats are left. The wind blows brisk from the northwest, rustling the birch leaves. The ferns change from green to yellow to brown. The robins are gone from the lawn and the garden. The swallows have flown from their nests in the boathouse. To take their places, migrating birds from the north stop off to rest on their way south. The crows and the gulls fly over, fussing and feuding, and the hummingbirds visit the petunia patch. Mr. Billing flies over, looking for a school of herring. When he sees you waving on the beach, he dips the seaplane's wings in greeting. On some days, the wind is so strong that not even the sturdy fishing boats are out on the bay. Now is the time for being watchful. And other times, there is not a breath of wind to ripple the reflection of an unusual sky. Now is the time for being prepared. Over in Blasto's Cove, Harry Smith looks at the sky and says, "We're gonna have some weather." On Eggemoggin Reach, Clyde Snowman listens to the loons and says, "It's a comin'." On Cape Rosier, Ferd Clifford listens to the sound of the bell off Spectacle Island and says, "She's a gonna blow." On your island, you feel the light, crisp feeling go out of the air and the heavy stillness take its place. It's time to make a quick trip to the mainland for food and gasoline. It's time to get ready. We're gonna have some weather. It's a comin'. She's gonna blow. In Bucks Harbor are the cruise schooners, the Alice Wentworth, the Stephen Tabor, the Victory Chimes, riding at anchor to spend the winter. Men are busy putting out extra anchors, pulling up skiffs and rowboats, checking moorings, checking chains, checking pennants, getting ready. Take aboard groceries, take aboard gasoline. All of the talk is of 100-pound acres, 2-inch rope, 1-inch chain. Will it hold? And the weather? And when? Mr. Gray strokes his chin and says, "With the next shift of the tide, hurry for home, for there is much to be done before the tide is too low." The ledges behind Pumpkin Island are covered with gulls, all sitting solemnly faced in the same direction. There is no giggling and no cackling as your wake splashes the ledge today. This is no time for seabird sense of humor. We're gonna have some weather. It's a comin'. She's gonna blow. With the next shift of the tide. Home on the island, you pull in the sailboat, chain the motorboat fast to its mooring, pull the rowboats high off the beach. Mr. Smith hurries by with a boatload of lobster traps that he has been taking up. Over in Swain's Cove, Mr. Billings put extra lines on the wings of the seaplane. Fishermen put extra lines on herring boats and scalloping boats. At Frankie Day's boatyard up Benjamin River, At the Hal Vaughn's boatyard up Horseshoe Creek, men are working with the tide, pulling up sloops and yawls, ketches and motorboats, shackling chains, tying ropes, making things fast, battening down, getting ready. Stack the groceries on kitchen shelves, bring in wood to build a fire, fill the generator with gas. Then take one last careful look while the calm sea pushes at dead low water. A mouse nibbles off one last stalk from the garden and drags it into his mouse hole. Spider scurries across his web and disappears into a knothole. All living things wait while the first surge of the incoming tide ripples past Eagle Island, ripples past Dirigo, past Pickering, past Two Bush Island. The bell buoy off Spectacle Island sways slightly with the ripple, tolling, tolling, tolling the shift of the tide. Gently, at first, the wind begins to blow. Gently, at first, the rain begins to fall. Suddenly, the wind whips the water into sharp, choppy waves, tears off the sharp tops and splashes them into ribbons of smoky spray, and the rain comes slamming down. The wind comes in stronger and stronger gusts. A branch snaps from a tree. A gull flies over, flying backward, hoping for a chance to drop into the lee of the island. Out in the channel, a tardy fishing boat wallows in the waves, seeking the shelter of Bucks Harbor. A tree snaps. Above the roar of the hurricane, you see and feel, but do not hear it fall. A latch gives way. People in papers and Parcheesi games are puffed hair over eyes across the floor, while father pushes and strains to close and bolt out the storm. Mother reads a story, and the words are spoken and lost in the scream of the wind. You're glad it is a thick story you have often heard before. Then you all sing together, shouting, "Eyes have seen the glory," just as loud as you can shout. The dish towels tucked by door sills, just to keep the salt spray out. The moon comes out, making a rainbow in the salt spray, a promise that the storm will soon be over. Now the wind is lessening, singing loud chords in the treetops. Lessening, it hums as you go up to bed. And the great swells coming in from the open sea say shh as they foam over the old rock and the point. Lessening, the wind whispers a lullaby in the spruce branches as you fall asleep in the bright moonlight. The next morning, you awaken to an unaccustomed light made by a frosty coating of salt on all the windows. And out of doors in the gentle morning lie reminders of yesterday's hurricane. Fallen and broken trees are everywhere, on the terrace, on the path, blocking your way at every turn. You cannot walk on familiar paths and trails, but you can explore the tops of giant fallen trees and walk on trunks and limbs where no one ever walked before. Then, seeking out still more places where no one ever walked before, you explore the jagged holes left by roots of fallen trees, under an old tree by the house you discover an Indian shell heap, and poking the thousands of snow-white clamshells, so old they crumble at a touch, you realize that you are standing on a place where Indian children stood before the coming of white men. Now it is time for one last chore of hauling seaweed from the beach to fertilize the garden. Spreading the seaweed with its iodine smell, you are pleased to see that the storm-flattened sunflowers are once more lifting their faces to the sun. And here are the hummingbirds humming a hymn to the morning, making a final round to the last of the petunias. It is time for hummingbirds to leave the island. It is the end of another summer. It is time for you to leave the island too. Goodbye to clams and mussels and barnacles, to crows and swallows, gulls and owls, sea urchins, seals, and porpoise. It is time to reset the clock from the rise and fall of the tide to the come and go of the school bus. Pack your bag and put in a few treasures, some gull feathers, a few shells, a book of pressed leaves, a piece of quartz that came from a crack in the old rock on the point. And children, don't forget your toothbrushes. Then it's all aboard and around Deer Island, past Birch Island, past Pumpkin Island, and across Eggamuggin Reach for the last time this year. Take a farewell look at the waves in the sky. Take a farewell sniff of the salty sea. A little bit sad about the place you are leaving, but a little bit glad about the place you are going. Is a time of quiet wonder. For wondering, for instance, where do the hummingbirds go in a hurricane? So that is Robert McCloskey's Time of Wonder. And if you've heard it before, I hope you enjoyed revisiting it. If you haven't heard it before, I hope you enjoyed this new story. And I love it because it's that sense of the wind, the coming storm, just like Jesus' disciples. They were waiting, right? They were waiting for, they weren't quite sure what and what was going to happen until the wind came rushing through and with the Spirit of God, just like how the kids in this book were waiting for that storm, not knowing what was going to happen. And then the wind came through and they couldn't see it, but they could see how it affected everything around them. And just like the Spirit of God affects everything around us. So that is all. I will see you next time. Be kind and stay well.